Hello, everybody. Once again, I'm Liam Crafton Jr., aka Zorvalchan Lestang Guru, and today we have part 6 and currently the final part of my Palladium rewrite. So, um, part 5 kind of introduced mystical aspects, focusing on the little bit of how I have magic points and how they're different than spells per day, and PPE from Palladium later games, including second edition, as well as specifically how spell magic and elemental magic works, or elemental spells. So, having said that, today we will kind of wrap up the rest of it. I'm hoping this will be a shorter video. Um, if you want to know the intricacies of how I do my magic points, that's the last video. I'll assume that you watched at least the first part of that for this one. So, symbology. I mentioned before, I combine wards and circles into symbology, into that kind of umbrella there. Go look at my occupational part. I believe it was part 2, and that would explain why I decided to combine the two. But overall, I pretty much keep the concept that is in the Palladium books, the core rules, on how wards and circles work, how they use power words, how there's runes and wards and stuff. I just do a little more what I consider tightening of the rules. If you read the main rule book, they describe wards as ward symbols put together to make an effect, and then you activate them very similar to magic spells. They had a wards per day in the original edition. Later in Adventures of the High Seas, which is the third book, they described the process differently. And instead of having ward symbols making a ward, they have wards making a ward phrase. And then they had a whole, it was like almost a 30 question about summoners and diabolists that they go really in detailed. And while I do like the idea of a ward phrase, it's kind of like building a sentence, but you build an effect with wards and conditions and augments and things like that. I wanted to clarify it because it's still a little ambiguous how they actually work. And this is something that a lot of players, and including myself, really would like to see in the game. It can have a lot of coolness in it, and I just wanted to define it more. Also, I wanted to bring in the aspects of symbology, being able to make magic items, along with the mundane episode here. I talked about how I like the idea of player characters being able to make their own weapons and armor and potions and stuff like that. So going along with that, this gives rules to how to make how players can make their own magic items using symbology and wizardry, and then how holy items would be made by clergy, by priests and clerics who might know some symbology. If you looked at the last one when I talked about divine spells, and that how I allow priests of deities who know circles and wards and things like that, they can do those things. They can get granted, say, a circle of protection versus angels, and if their deity knows that, instead of getting a spell, or they might get a the infliction ward. Now they wouldn't be able to do anything with it, but if they learned a couple of wards, then they could do those things and be able to bind that into magical items. So, having said that, power words, runes, wards, all of those, they have really nice pictures in the Palladium book here. Um, just take a moment. Like, you go through circles. They have a picture listed for every circle, every symbol, every ward. They have a nice, I don't have any problem with it. I used to memorize how the Palladium rune alphabet looked, and would transliterate things into it, and knew certain symbols and all of that stuff. It's just, I like the idea of either there being a maybe a magical version, and then because I open it up to priests, they might, instead of using a mystical symbol to focus energy, maybe they use a holy symbol. So I just like the idea in my setting that it's not a this is always, say, agony. Agony might be this, it might be this, and maybe characters will learn a different symbol over here, and then way over there when they use another symbol. So that's why I don't necessarily have hardcore pictures. Plus, I didn't want to just plagiarize the artwork in here, and so I came up with a few other ways to represent that in my rewrite. So wards, I have ward types. I break them apart into effects, triggers, focus, and augments. I like the idea of ward materials. I like the idea of components and them being made from different things. I just kind of streamlined it and maybe reworded it, things that fit me and my group's way of understanding better than this. It's not saying it's better for everybody. I'm not going to try to say that, but for me and my group, I try to listen to their concerns, what confused them, and write it in a way that was more understandable. The one thing I did is I did put kind of a size and weight limit, or a requirement, not a limit, a requirement. So I list all the things like they do in the Palladium book, but I say you have to have an ounce of it within each section. So if you wanted you need a charm, you making it from gold, you need an ounce of gold. And I have the minimum, I think, is like about an inch or so. I believe that's in Palladium. But I like the idea of as you advance in, and it could be bigger, but I like the idea of this, if you advance in levels, you could make them smaller and smaller and smaller. I do require the same amount of weight. What I say is that the mystic nature as you're forming the ward will shrink it. So you can have a ward and you make it and it's that inch, but when you affix it and you're doing it with magic and starting to activate it, then it can shrink up to really, 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 really tiny. So that's just something I thought would be a neat way, but you can make it as big as you want, but that's the minimum required amount. So that's ward materials, ward components. I specify how you can create and place them. If you paint them, you need to do it quickly because maybe paint will run or it can be rain can wash it away, etc. But that is going to take, each ward is going to take one round to place a ward. So if you're creating a ward phrase, it might take a few rounds. Each round you place one ward. If you're painting it, if you have them pre-carved, carving those is going to take an hour per ward. In Palladium main game, they go 1 hour to like 4 hours, and even the permanence ward, it's either 120 or 240 hours. There's a lot of hours in it. I just make it an hour. I wanted it to be a simple thing instead of having to always look how long they would do. Conscious decision on my part to do it that way. Fashioned is if you're carving it, if you're forging it, casting it, however you are creating the physical without paint, then it's going to take an hour. Otherwise, it's going to take a round. And there, I talk about my size. The wards must be a minimum of 1.5 inch. Sorry, I said 1 inch, 1.5 inch, about 4 centimeters. And then you can shrink them down if you wish to per level. And then I break up those types of wards: triggers, foci, effects, and augments. So the trigger is the very first thing, and you can say a word sentence or a word phrase. I like that idea. Each symbol or effect type thing is a ward, and then you put them and make a sentence or a phrase, and then you activate it, and once it makes sense, you can place. So a trigger can be evil, good, magic, numbers, rune names. All of those will be what is going to set the ward off or what won't set the ward off. So like example of evil, I have a little positive and negative symbol. Basically, you add a little mark or something to it and it will flip it. So evil means only supernaturally evil creatures will trigger the ward. Or if it's the opposite, then supernaturally evil creatures will not trigger the ward. One thing in my world that I wanted to specify is I don't want it really easy for people to know others' alignments, because that's just a cheesy way to go, oh, they're playing a character with a bad alignment. Now I can find out how to kill them. I like a lot of more secrecy, I guess you could say, in my games. So that's why I specified supernatural evil. And the same thing with good, magic, numbers, rune names, all of those can be used. A rune name, you write the person's name in runes, they're the only one it affects, or they're the only one it doesn't affect, etc. Each one of these has a magic point cost. How my wards work is you kind of look back at the previous video, the level, you take that. So if you're doing a ward at level 5, you're going to start off with 5, and then you're going to add the points for each ward. So it's not going to be like a 5 plus 5. Here, if you did something that was magic, the magic point cost was 2. So I want to say evil and good. I don't have that. That might be something I need to write as I edit and do things. I've always noticed I forget something, so apparently I need to add a evil and good magic point cost. Probably won't be that much, and so numbers is the equivalent number of sequences. So numbers would say that there's going to be more than one thing happening. So you take say you're setting up a 5th level ward phrase. It would have a base of 5, and then you would add all the components to it. So magic would cost 2, a rune's names would cost 5, etc. Focus is, or foci, are what is the thing happening, how is it being applied. So the first is what's the trigger, the second is how it's being applied. Alone, that is just a simple, you place a ward on somebody and it directly affects them, the person you put it on, or the thing that you put it on. So then inflict is you can make it so that it goes to a person without being right on them. Protection by infliction is you're protecting this book, you put a ward on it, somebody touches it, it's protecting the book by doing a flame. It shoots out fire at the person, it burns that person. Otherwise, if it was just an inflict, it would inflict fire upon the book itself and catch the book on fire, which you could use to, say, start a fire if that's what you wanted to use it for. Protection from is kind of the opposite. It's going to protect the book from fire, or you put it on somebody, then it's going to protect them from fire. And area of effect is whatever that thing is happening is going to encompass an area. And that's why it's cost a 50 added to the base level. And then the effects are the same effects from the Palladium book: agony, burning pain, blind, charm, all these. And a lot of these will specify what they can be used for and what they can't be used for. So like a burning pain can be used alone, it can be used infliction, protection by infliction, and area of effect. There's not really a burning pain type thing that there will be a protection from, but fire is very common, so you can do protection from fire. That's why up here you can see protection from fire. All fire does half damage is one of the options. So all of these are very basic from Palladium books. And then alarm modifier is a loud alarm that everybody can hear, or a silent alarm once that thing is triggered, and it can be in addition to the effect, so it's part of that phrase. It can only be done only when supernatural evil touches it. It's going to get inflicted by fire, and there's going to be a silent alarm when that triggers. That's going to go to me, and I'm going to be able to hear that. And then augments are the 2 power doubles everything, and permanence makes a certain duration permanent. Very, very simple, but it's very hard material to come by. And then I have a detailed example of sample ward placement, activation, and triggering, how everything's happened. I really like examples that cover things. And then I talk about advanced magic items, and that's how a symbologist who might know spells could make could bind a spell into an object, and then how that is formed. It's sort of based off of my Dunamis magical enchantments, Palladium wards, and the ward phrases kind of built up on a similar thing, as well as an adventure quest had a way to do binding spells and stuff into items. So I kind of took three different systems and kind of mix and match them together. Okay, so then we go into circle magic, and like I said, my circles are generic. They're not necessarily something that this is what a certain circle looks at. This is an example of what a circle might look like. Protection circles, summoning circles, and circles of power, all pretty much from the main book. The main thing is, since I don't have that distinction between devils and demons, I just have infernal. So you can have a protection against infernal or summoning infernal, lesser or greater, but not necessarily a specific demons and devils. But other ones are very much the same. All of those also have a magic point cost. And again, that is the magic point. As with ward spells, it's added to the level of the circle. So protection against angels is 9. If you wanted to cast that at third level, then it would be 3 plus 9, so it would be 12. Just simple math to make things. One of the things they don't fully describe in the book, and it took me a while to wrap my mind around it and figure out what was going on, is that they talked about open and closed circles in the Palladium book. Open circles, anybody can go in. So, say you're a symbologist or summoner or diabolist, if you're doing Palladium, and you wanted to, say, get protected against undead. So you draw an undead circle, and if it's open, then anybody except for those undead could come into it and seek shelter within that circle, that protection from undead circle. Then protection circles have a saving throw of 16, so that undead would need a 16 or higher to go through. But they have closed circles, which prevent anybody who's not specifically written into that circle can't come in. So then, just the way my mind was thinking is, well, what if I make that undead circle, or what if I only know how to do a protection circle against fairies? Well, it's protection circles are saving throw is 16, so I make a closed protection circle, and now undead can't get through it either, and it didn't quite make sense. So what I decided to do is make the base the what it's specified for. So specified against fairies at 16. Anybody and anything else trying to get into it, if it's closed, if it's open, it allows everybody else to get into it. But if it's closed, then you're going to get the normal base, which I believe, but I could be wrong. I believe circles are 13, so you need a 13 or better to get in if you were undead and it was closed. So that way, any protection circle doesn't become a protection from everybody, and you can still have it closed. Same thing with like summoning circles, and that they would have a protection against that thing that they summoned. Um, and then there's the simple protection and the superior protection, which were based off of open, closed, and stuff like that. Circle of powers are straight out of the book. And again, I just did magic points plus the levels. So I'm not going to go into those because they are pretty much straight from the book. The only thing that I did was I specified how those protection circles worked if they're closed, and how I use the magic points instead of PPE, or just allowing them to be done without magic is pretty much how it was in the original game. So summoning circles, and again, here's just an example of what I was doing with summoning. Power circles, here's a version of a power matrix. It allows 4 other spells to be added, or circles, sorry, to be added. And uh, we'll just go to the end of that, and then we go to psychic powers. So I call them psychic powers, and I mentioned this before instead of psionics. Psionics is a portmanteau between electronics and psychic electronics. And I just think in a world that doesn't have electronics, it's psychic powers. Even if I have to use one word or two words instead of one word, it just fits a little bit better. Back in character creation, I talked about how you can determine if your character has psychic abilities. Instead of having, I liked a random chance. I didn't like two random chances. So in Palladium, you had to pick a species that had a chance, and then you had to roll that chance. And then once you succeeded at that chance, then depending on if you rolled minor, major, or master, then you had a 60% chance for everything up to the highest level. First level for minor, 1 through 3rd for major, and 1 through 10 for master. It just, I didn't like the two things for chance. So, but I do like the idea of every species being able to be psychic. I didn't necessarily see a reason why they shouldn't. And as well as there should be something, some cost associated with it, because if you just choose, hey, I want to be psychic as a ranger or a thief or whatever, I think there should be a cost. Otherwise, everybody would choose it. So what I did is you just take 1, 2, or 3 dice away from your attributes, and it could be any attribute. So if you wanted to say physical beauty is a dump stack and get rid of that, you get rid of 3 dice or 2 dice or 1 die off of your physical beauty, and that's how you get minor, major, and master. Your the things that a normal person would contribute to those attributes would go to psychic, which sort of ties in with some later Palladium way that they talk about stuff. So psychics are pretty much straight out of here. Unlike later books, there were actually levels, 1 through 10th level of psychic powers, and most of them kind of the opposite of spells. Spells, almost all spells had a per level, whether it was duration or damage or something per level. Psychic abilities are actually the opposite. They give a cost, and it doesn't matter if you're casting it in your level 1 or 10. If you're casting Mind Bolt, I think that's what it's called. Let's just go here. I think it was a mind block. No, there's some type of little mind bolt thing, and I'm just not seeing it. Of course, because oh well. But basically, it would be you do this much damage. Period. There are some that allow it to be per level, but it is more rare. So on these, I just have the straight ISP cost. It's not a per level. You don't have to worry about level that you're casting it. Some things allow you to pump more ISP into it to make it higher, and I kept that that way. And if you are a class, say a priest who gets magic points to use to fuel the ISP, you just take it off of where it says 2 ISP, you take 2 magic points. And that's how that works. Again, like spells, I went through later books and added stuff that I thought were neat or necessary. Very good example of that would be like Psi Shield, Psi Sword. Those are kind of iconic, since Rift's iconic psychic abilities. So I decided to keep them. They're cool. They make perfect sense, and I did that. The other thing that I did is there's a couple of things like up here. Here's Mars Video Cat. He wasn't here at the beginning. If you look at level 5, basic force field, that is in the this book, but they don't have an advanced force field, so I added an advanced force field. And I also did that kind of as a middle ground between different editions, or not even editions, different printing. This here is a 6th printing, and the way that it has basic force field is it says armor rating of 8, SDC of 20, which is very close to a padded leather. And by the, I want to say the ninth or something printing, whatever my PDF is, that printing has it armor rating of 18 with 20 SDC. Doesn't quite make as much sense when you look at armor of Ithan at 18 and 180, I believe is what its SDC was. So, um, sorry about that if you're just a little alarm going off. So I just, on some of those basic advanced, if it said one, I added the other one to give a couple of choices to show an increase, and I'll kind of show you how that went. But otherwise, they're very, very close to what they were, straight from the Palladium book. If we go to that level, I believe it was level 5, basic force field, I did it as, if you watch my mundane part, which I want to say was the fourth part, part 4 talked about how I use SDC. So for basic force field, I count it as a light armor, and so every 5 points of damage you do will reduce its SDC by 1. So this starts off with an armor rating of 12, SDC of 20. The armor rating is equivalent to reinforced leather, and 20 is a pretty decent, and you can pump it. So that base costs 12, but for every additional ISP you pump into it, you can get an additional um, I one SDC per ISP. So do that gives players a little bit of control over how their basic force field would work. And then if we move to level 8, that's when the advanced force field is. The advanced force field costs double the amount, but you can also pump it 1 point per additional SDC. It still has an SDC of 20, but the difference is it is considered heavy armor, metal armor, so it only takes 1 SDC points of damage for every 10 damage that gets rolled. And the armor rating is 18, so then you have it the equivalent of the armor of Ithan, or in my game, since I don't have Ithan, mystic armor. So that is kind of how psychic powers work. It's very, very much. I had no problems with ISP cost and how ISP worked in Palladium, so I pretty much kept it, added a few things, and left the rest as it is. So now we'll go to healer. Healer from the main book. They're called clergy. They're not associated with the deity, so I took them away from that. They are physical. They need a physical endurance. That's a requirement because their body is so in tune. It's not quite a mental thing, but their body is so in tune that they can heal others with their own physical health. You can kind of see it as that way. Um, Again, powers in here, ISP worked very well. Healers used ISP also, so I kept everything with the healer. The one thing that I did change is I added more healer abilities because healers, in my opinion, were lacking a lot. Being called the healer, and that's the thing that they do, they were lacking a lot of healing powers that mind mages and wizards had. And so I took things from psychic, and if it's a psychic power, I just brought it over. The ISP cost is the same. If there was a wizard ability, then I kind of changed it a little and just gave it an ISP cost, and I added another level of abilities to it. Also, the thing with healers were that they kind of stopped at third level and had everything. And so you'd reach level 3 as a healer, you'd have everything. So it was beneficial then to swap out. Back in my occupations, I have it so that healers actually get some stuff, so there's a reason to kind of stay afterwards, and they get another level of powers. So a couple of the additions that I did is I added a transfer damage. I always like the concept of being able to not necessarily heal somebody's damage completely, but you heal them by taking the damage upon yourself. And since Palladium is old school D&D style of you have to get the second level to heal, priests, shamans, healers, everything, that heals others in this book, you have to get to at least second level. I wanted a level one thing to kind of appeal possibly to people, so I did that transfer damage. And since they have a high physical endurance, they could take some points, and they don't have to take all the damage. They can kind of choose what they're going to do. So I added that. The rest are pretty much the same as in the book. I think I added diagnosis on level 2 to figure out what was going on. Um, Level 3, I might have added. I guess it'd be easy if I just looked at healers here. I just am trying not to have this be a very, very long thing. So healers, if we look at level 2, they got healing touch. So yes, I added diagnosis, which comes from um, psychic ability. I think that's needed for a healer to know what is wrong. Um, Healing touch is the same. Lust for life, negate toxins, and soothing touches. The rest of those are the same. Level 3, exorcism, resurrection, those are the same. So at level 4, I took cure insanity and the psychic surgery. I call it healing surgery. I took those from the psychic powers and restoration as a spell to you get to resurrect somebody, but why wouldn't you be able to regrow their limbs? Mages with the right spell could do that, so I added restoration as a ability as well. So that is pretty simple, self-explanatory. Illusions are pretty much straight from the old ones, the second book in the Palladium first edition. I kept a lot of the same concepts. The only kind of thing I did is before there's a point in the original, there's a point where you get illusions, and I want to say it is maybe level 8 where you get image, sound, odor, and taste. Um, you might need touch wherever touch comes in, but you could kill somebody. You just make an illusion so great. You make an illusion of a big giant, and the giant swings a big sword, and you just die. So I didn't quite like that aspect of it, so I allow it to do shock point damage, but not hit point damage. As you probably know, if you've seen before, I separate hit points. I don't add SDC. I separate hit points from shock points. So you start off with hit points equal to your physical endurance. There's very few ways that advances. And then all your D6s per your rolling per level, that is shock points. Some small modifiers in there, but basically shock points can get damaged by illusions, hit points can't. That's just a way that I keep it from just arbitrarily killing by using a decent illusion that somebody fails versus. But otherwise, everything is pretty much the same. There was some, at least to me, a little confusion on reading the percentages, what the percentages of the illusions, what they meant. On like, I'm trying to make an illusion of something I know, something I've just been told about, something I have intimate knowledge about, etc. So I made those successes a little more clear, and then if they're flawed, they might just be flawed a little enough. So if you roll well enough, it's only so slightly flawed that they might still be convinced that it is a true illusion. So basically, that is what these charts are. Otherwise, all the way down the list, it's pretty much straight from the second book there. And then that is all I have for my Palladium rewrite. Additional things that I am adding, I'm adding building type things, and that's kind of from BECME, actually, D&D. BECME is what I'm using for that, because a lot of people are really interested in building um, temples and bars and inns and adventuring guilds and stuff like that. So I'm trying to come up with those type of rules, and if I don't have to invent one whole cloth, Palladium is based off of D&D, so D&D rules animals could very well easily work in Palladium. So that is kind of my mindset there, as well as getting some animals so people can do familiars and stuff like that. I'll probably simplify them. That will be the only change. Instead of having a lion and a tiger, I might just have like a big cat, and then maybe a medium one for like jaguars and pumas and cougars and leopards and all of that type of thing, and then a small one for like house cats and maybe some of the smaller wild feral cats out there and things like that, or like a Kodiak, a grizzly bear, a polar bear. Just it's kind of this. Don't really need those distinctions, and then you just reskin it. Or, you let the player say what they got as a familiar. So that's kind of what I'll do, and then demons, devils, things like that. Otherwise, I don't really need that in a PDF that I give players because I want my players to be surprised by things. So certain things that they have access to, yes, they should have access to. But if not, then it can be a surprise for them. So having said that, I'll wrap things up. So I did get this down under 40 minutes, so I'm pretty happy about that. If you have any comments about this part or the entire series, about my rewrites, thoughts, anything like that, please let me know down in the comments. So, having said that, I am Lee McCracken Jr., aka Zorvalachan Less Than Guru, and until next time, I will catch you later.